Right. Good afternoon, everyone. So, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. So, we will begin the lecture for chapter 5. So, as I told you, for this report 1, I have to cover until chapter 6. So, we have remainder 2 chapters. So, today, chapter 5, and then the next chapter, chapter 6, and then you are already ready to do the design report for stage 1. Okay. So, today we will talk about plant location. So, as you can see in the report, one of the important consideration when you're talking about designing a chemical plant is definitely the location of the plant, right? So today we will discuss in details how do you determine the criteria and the reasons that you need to consider when you want to choose a location. Okay. Right. So when we talk about location, don't forget that actually it consists of 3 main aspects. Okay, so it consists of 1, plant location, and you also will have to consider and design your layout. So this layout consists of site layout and plant layout. So the process will start with you choose first, identify the location of your plant. And then subsequently, you will decide on the site layout. Site layout means how do you want to place the buildings in your plant, meaning this includes the chemical plant, includes the office, includes the waste treatment plant, storage tank, so on and so forth, including the roads, so on and so forth. So second part will be the site layout. And lastly, the plant layout. Plant layout meaning in your chemical plant, how do you want to arrange your equipment or arrange the units and parts of your process in the chemical plant itself. Okay, so you must remember that it doesn't only consist of picking a location. Okay, you have to pick a location for your design project. Pick a location and then design your site layout and subsequently design the plant layout as well. So I will explain to you today how do you going to do this, to choose a location, to design the site layout, and to design the plant layout. Okay, so what you do for PFD is the process flow diagram, but then you have to also imagine how this layout will be in your real chemical plant. Okay, but before we go to site layout and plant layout, we will always have to begin with the plant location, meaning you really have to decide in your design project in particularly where you want the plant to be located. Okay, I hope that you can choose a location in Malaysia. Okay, I would like it to be in Malaysia for easier discussion, but if you want it to be overseas pun boleh, but slightly hard lah nanti sebab later you have to do economical consideration. Okay, design project 1 you have a little bit, design project 2 you will do a comprehensive economical consideration. So if let's say you choose an overseas location, then you have to consider the consideration in terms of that overseas location. This includes, for example, water tariff, electric tariff. So you need to know, let's say you choose New Zealand, let's say, then you have to calculate the cost based on the tariff, based on the exchange, the conversion exchange of the country. So I would highly advise you to choose a Malaysia location so that it will be easier for you. Okay, so we will begin. What are the considerations that you have to actually consider when you're choosing a location? There are actually many factors. Okay, so there's not only one factors. There are many factors that might and will influence your decision. So this include first, political strategies. I will explain later. Environmental impact, effluent disposal, local community consideration, climate, okay, geographical of the land, availability of labor and utilities, transportation facilities, supply of raw material. So later, when you're doing your design project, you have to discuss all of these factors that are in relation to the location that you choose. Okay, let's say you choose this location, you have to discuss in relation to all of these consideration, right? Okay. So we will start with the very first one, political and strategic consideration. Okay, so you must understand when a company, let's say your company decides to open a chemical plant, you may have to consider as well the political and strategic consideration of the country. So if you realize most of the countries, not say most, all of these countries would like to encourage more of this chemical plants being built in their countries, because you know the more of these businesses, you will generate more money, you will generate a better economy for the country. So each of these country will offer attractive factors to attract you to build the plant in your country. So for example, we talk about in the aspect of factors, these include capital grants, tax concession, which I told you before, tax exemption, and other inducement often given by government to promote new investment. And sometimes they will offer certain investment at a very specific location in the country. Why? Because they want to actually generate high how do I say? You want to generate more income towards certain locations. So for example, like let's say the government has identified this area of which there's no economy is being generated, or the people at that location has no job opportunities, so they will offer certain inducement or certain incentives so that the chemical plant can be built at that area. So one example is to encourage, example, if the areas have low unemployment, so they might actually induce these exemptions or these benefits to encourage more plant being built over there. Okay, so and sometimes the government may also offer grants. So this availability of grants can be the overriding consideration in site selection. So let's say if the company is not that, how do I say, it's not that big, the company relies on this kind of grants, relies on exemptions. So this political and strategic consideration can be an important factor. Okay, so for example, if you're talking about in the case of Malaysia, okay, so you can see that Malaysia usually the economic companies or the plants are situated probably in the Klang Valley and probably in Johor Bahru, something like that. But you know that Malaysia is very big, right? So in order to encourage these economies, chemical plants, so on and so forth, economic business to be operated out of Klang Valley, Malaysia has offered certain exemption as well. So you can see Malaysia offered incentive for investment in promoted product and activities in manufacturing. So where are they? So they are actually encouraging in company located in Sabah, Sarawak, Federal Territory of Labuan, and the designated Eastern Corridor of Peninsular Malaysia, which covers Kelantan, Terengganu, Pahang, and Mersing in Johor. So if you build your chemical plant in any of this area, what do you get? The government actually will grant you tax exemption of 85% of your income for 5 years. So meaning for the first 5 years, you are exempted 85% tax exemption of your income. Okay, and the balance 15% will be taxed at the company tax rate. So you can see for the first 5 years, as I told you before, the first 5 years usually it will take that minimal amount of years for the company to break even. So that's why normally the government will give you some sort of tax exemption for the first 5 years in order to attract you to actually build your chemical plant in such area. Okay, so you can see in terms of Malaysia, they are trying to divert the businesses rather than centralize on the Klang Valley area. They're going towards the Eastern Corridor, meaning Kelantan, Terengganu, Pahang, as well as the Borneo area, Sabah, Sarawak, and as well as Labuan. Okay. And then there's another assumption, there's other benefits that's provided by the government as well. So for example, in the case of Malaysia, as you know, we are the second largest producer of palm oil in the world behind Indonesia. Okay, so when you have so much of this oil palm plantation, you have a lot of oil palm waste, or we call it as oil palm biomass. Okay, so what happened is the government offers certain assumption if the company utilize oil palm biomass to produce value-added products. So for example, if you choose to use this raw material, which is the oil palm biomass material, the government will give you certain benefit as well. So it gives you the motivation, it gives the incentive to the company to consider using this locally available raw material rather than perhaps, let's say, they they will have to import raw materials from the other country or overseas. The government are encouraging them to actually use this locally available raw material. So you must understand that the benefits offered by government covers location, covers as well as the kind of raw material that you may use in your production as well. Okay, right. So if you want to know more about this for Malaysia, definitely you go to the MIDA website. MIDA website, I hope you know what's MIDA. So MIDA website has all these benefits, so on and so forth, that you can actually read if you like to know more. Okay, so that's the first consideration, political and strategic consideration. Next one is, of course, we're talking about raw material supply, which I told you before roughly, but this is another factor that you may have to consider as well. So the availability and cost of raw material often determine the location as well. Okay, so just time we're talking about political strategic consideration. Second consideration is also your raw material. How easy can you obtain your raw material and at what cost? So as I told you, you have to identify your potential supplier that will be able to supply you the desired raw material. Okay, next one. Plants that produce bulk chemical should be located close to the source of raw material if the cost of shipping product is less than the cost of shipping feed. Okay, so you have to consider two factors. Okay, so of course you may have to consider the location of raw material, but as I told you before, you also have to consider the location of your customer, right? So you have to actually consider the cost of your raw material, the selling cost of your product, and the shipping cost for both. So let's say katakan you have to consider the shipping cost. If your plant is located far from your raw material, then you have to consider the shipping cost. If your location is close to the raw material, you have to consider the cost of exporting your product. So there are the two things that you have to consider. The cost of shipping, four things actually. The cost of shipping to the feed, cost of shipping of the feed or the product, the location of you, whether closer to the customer or closer to the supplier. Okay, so for example, a new ethylene capacity is being built in the Middle East, close to the supply of cheap ethane from natural gas. So recently, you can see there's a lot of new production chemical plant of producing ethylene, which is placed at the Middle East, as Middle East has a abundant supply of cheap ethane. Okay, and on the other hand, all refineries are typically located near major population center because they produce a variety of food grades that are costly to ship separately. Okay, so again, there are many considerations when we are talking about how do you determine the location. Okay, so for example, in the case of Malaysia, if let's say you want to identify potential location based on the raw material, these are the examples. So for example, if your raw material are naphtha, methane ke, ethylene ke, propylene ke, benzene, toluene or styrene, these are the major companies that are producing this kind of chemicals. So this is what I obtained from the internet. So the same as what you can do, you can try to Google what are the potential companies that are producing in a large amount of the chemicals that you are using as your raw material. So for example, let's say in your case, you are using naphtha. Okay, your raw material is naphtha. You have different alternative locations. So if you want to be placed near to your raw material supply, you can be placed in Terengganu. I think this is a Kerteh. You can be placed nearby to Melaka. Melaka also has one Petronas Penapisan. We have other companies, Malaysia Refinery Company, Shell Refinery Company, Esso Malaysia Sdn Bhd. So you have different kinds of supplier that you may identify, which may decide the location of your plant. Okay, so then you're talking about using petrochemicals as your raw material. So if petrochemical zones in Malaysia, I think you know the three main petrochemical zones in Malaysia will be Kerteh, Gebeng Pahang, and Pasir Gudang, Tanjung Langsat, Johor. So these are the main petrochemical zones that produce many types of chemical that are used widely to produce other kinds of chemicals. So if your raw materials are among these, okay, so this may be the strategic location for you, right? Okay. So next one, transportation. So as I told you before, after this, you have to consider transportation of two, transportation of raw material, transportation of your product. Okay, so a site should be selected that is close to at least two major form of transport. Okay, so at least two. So you have an option, either road, rail, waterway, which is either canal or river, or a seaport. Okay, so again, dia tak ada fixed rule of mana satu yang betul. It depends on your product as well. Let's say your product, you identify local customer, you are not exporting it, then of course road and rail will be sufficient. But if let's say, sorry, not only supplier, customer, not only customer, supplier jugalah. So same as if let's say you identify your customer or supplier to be in overseas, okay, then you have to consider, of course, seaport or even air transportation. Okay, so the location, the factors that you choose to, you have to fit to your product that you are producing. So there's no one fixed answer for semua group. Semua group pun pilih dekat dengan road, dengan rail, not necessarily. It depends on your chemicals, on your product, and on your chemical plant as well. Okay. Road transport is increasingly used, of course, and is suitable for local distribution from a central warehouse. So that's why if you see at Peninsular Malaysia, we have an excellent highway from south to north that connects from Johor up to Perlis. So why do they have an excellent highway? It's actually to accommodate all these kind of industry. Okay, so when you have an excellent highway road, okay, you also actually enhance the businesses, especially in terms of transportation. Okay, and next, rail transport is usually cheaper for long distance. Rail transport is usually cheaper for long distance transport of bulk chemicals. So rail transport is also an option. So Malaysia also, we have an excellent rail. I think from JB up to Perlis, we have an excellent rail transport as well. Okay, so it depends again on your chemicals, whether your chemicals can be transported safely using the rail, or your chemical needs to use road transportation for its transportation. Okay, so next one. Air transportation, the last one, is convenient and efficient for moving personal and essential equipment and supplies, and the site proximity to a major airport should be considered. So airport is also in consideration, although we rarely use air to transport your feeds or your product. But you cannot deny that having a close proximity to an airport is also essential. For example, if you are purchasing equipment, you're purchasing supplies, or let's say you want to move your personnel. If let's say your plant is a multinational companies where you have branches, let's say in other countries, definitely having a plant nearby to an airport can be an advantage. Okay, so you can see that, all right, if you want to consider, actually, when the country wants to develop an industrial zone, okay, especially Malaysia, we're talking about in context of Malaysia, when they build industrial zones, they have already considered all these factors. So you must understand, katakan when the government choose to open an industrial zone in Kerteh, in Gebeng, in Pasir Gudang, or in Bintulu, they have already considered all these factors. Okay, so why? Because to attract investors by having all these benefits and facilities for them. So for example, let's say if you are a company interested to open their chemical plant in, let's say, Gebeng. Okay, so what do they have in Gebeng? So the government has already provided facilities and infrastructures, which included, let's say, Gebeng is nearby to the Kuantan Port, is nearby to Environment Technology Park, East Coastway Highway. So Gebeng, the transportation benefits, they are nearby to Kuantan Port, they are by the East Coast Highway. On the other hand, if you build your plant in Kerteh, they have the Kerteh Port, they have as well Kuantan Port. Pasir Gudang, Tanjung Langsat, they have Johor Port, Tanjung Pelepas Port, Tanjung Langsat Port. You see, they even have more than one port for that, to cater for that one industrial zone. And for example, Bintulu Sarawak, Okay, they have Bintulu Port, they have Bintulu Airport. Okay, so let's say if you want to know more about the benefits of this main industrial zone, you can just Google. Okay, for example, when I Google Gebeng Industrial Estate, all these industrial zone, dekat ada website, the government will, they will have a specific website on all these industrial zones, so that katakan potential investor, if they want to know more, it's just by Googling, they already can have all these important information. Okay, for example, let's say Gebeng. Okay, so when I Google Gebeng, okay, they specify clearly, okay, accessibility to roads and railway. Okay, so for example, they say that the East Coast Highway, which link Kuantan and Kuala Lumpur. Kuala Lumpur is the capital city. You know that you cannot escape. You will have to have excellent transportation to the capital city of the country. So they have an East Coast Highway and the travel time of just 2 hours. Okay, next. They have a railway link that connects the Kerteh Terengganu to Gebeng and Kuantan Port. Okay, so they tell you now, if you build in Gebeng, okay, you have an excellent railway link to Kerteh. So why Kerteh? Remember I told you just now, Kerteh is another industrial zone with a lot of production of raw materials. So they already identify for you, if you want to purchase your raw material from Kerteh, we have an excellent railway link for you. So raw material supply, transportation dah settle. We already told you, you have a railway link connected to Kerteh, and as well if let's say you are importing your raw material, we have Kuantan Port, or let's say you are exporting your raw material, you're exporting your product, we have Kuantan Port. Similarly, maybe you are selling your product to Kerteh, the same example, we have a railway link. Okay, and that is how they cover all the important consideration in terms of road and railway. So the company may have to consider whether these facilities fits to the need of their plant. If it fits, then perhaps this may be the location. Okay. Next one, you cannot award but have to consider availability of labor as well. So let's say if you choose one rural area as let's say government open a new industrial zone at a very new area, you may have to consider what about the availability of labor. Okay, so labor is needed for two reasons. One is the construction of your plant, meaning the initial stage, you need existing labor to construct your plant, and don't forget subsequently the operation of your plant. Okay, and then labor ni pula, there are the dual types. You have skilled labor, you have unskilled labor. Okay, so you know the difference, right? So those that involve a more highly skilled knowledge, you will need a highly skilled construction workers, and you have unskilled construction workers or labor as well. Okay, so skilled workers, which included construction worker, may be brought in from outside the site area. Okay, kenapa? Sebab during construction, probably it takes about few years. So you may be able to absorb the cost of bringing these skilled workers, skilled construction workers to your construction site solely to build the plant, meaning short term. Short term planning tak apa, but in the terms of operation of your plant, which will take many years, long-term plan, you have to already consider how you want to secure this pool of workers. Okay, so adequate pool of unskilled laborers and labor suitable for training to operate the plant locally. So if you have unskilled workers in your existing location, you may consider training them. So training them for the long term, for the operation of the plant, you may consider training these locally available laborers. Okay. Besides that, skilled craft workers such as electrician, welders, pipe fitters will be needed for plant maintenance. So plant maintenance pun, you have to identify the specific labor, and they are very highly skilled because it needs a very highly skilled of needs of knowledge, which comes in terms of electrician, welders, and pipe fitters. Okay, so then you have to consider, when you have labor, you have to consider the local labor laws, trade union custom, restricted practices must be considered when you assess the ability and suitability of local labor for recruitment and training. Okay, so you may consider importing workers from overseas, from other country, but you must understand the government policy, you have to justify. You cannot simply say that I want to export 500 of workers from overseas, the government will not simply give you the allowance without considering the locally available labor. So you have to understand the government must consider as well the rights and needs of the local labor before they allow the companies to actually hire overseas workers to come and work in the chemical plant. Okay, so next one, utilities. Okay, so don't only consider your plant, don't only consider the main part of your plant. You may have to remember that a plant needs utilities. Okay, so utility services are of important consideration as well. Okay, so chemical process definitely require large quantity of water. And for the process, especially for cooling, if you have any cooling process, you may need water and general use. And hence, the plant must be located near a suitable source of water. Okay, so water is an important utilities and you have to consider a suitable source of water. So the processed water, a large amount of processed water can be drawn from a river, well, or purchased from the local authority. Okay, so next, cooling water can be taken from a river, lake, or the sea. Elsewhere, cooling towers will be needed. But you have to consider, kamu pun tak boleh sebarangan identify sebarang sungai, sebarang river and just take the water. There are local regulation to cover this as well. Okay, so next, electrical. So you have water, you need electric as well. Okay, so especially kalau your process involve a lot of use of power, for example, electrochemical processes, hence your plant must be closer to a cheap power source. Okay, so if let's say your plant uses a lot of electrical power, of course all plants will use a lot of electrical power, but in particularly processes that uses electrochemical, you will actually have a more larger power requirement. So you have to choose a source which is nearby and cheap. Okay, so a competitively priced fuel must be available on site for steam and power generation. So remember, when I taught you the PFD, you see, right, certain boiler will need the low pressure steam, high pressure steam, medium pressure steam. So you have to consider these as well. How are these available locally for your plant needs? However, on the other hand, the government has already think about this for you. So, for example, if you choose to build at this main industrial zone, the government has provided all these, the government and the owner of these industrial zones has already provided the facilities for you. So, for example, if you build your plant in Kerteh, Terengganu, the facilities included gas processing plant, peninsular gas utilization project, centralized utility facilities. So actually, most of these industrial zone, they dah ada their own centralized utility facilities available to be used for the chemical plant. So for example, Gebeng as well, they have the centralized utility facilities. So for example, if you go again to the Gebeng one website, you can see they mention specifically. Let's say if you want to, your plant needs electricity, right? So they will tell you, okay, supplier dia siapa, what are the facilities for electricity, water as well. So they mention if you build in Gebeng, the water supply is from the Semambu water treatment plant, okay? And if you are using natural gas, they have the utility as well. So that makes your work easier. If you choose all this main industrial zone, your work is somewhat easier because they already mentioned to you all the facilities. But don't forget, okay, when you choose all this industrial zone, I can bet you the land price will be very, very expensive in comparison to the non-industrial zone. Because of course lah, when you build at my place, I give you everything. The price, the cost of the land will definitely be more expensive, especially when all these industrial zones are established for a very long time and there are many chemical plants over there. Okay, so again, itulah kena consider factor. Harga pun might be very expensive, but you have all these facilities as well. Okay. So next one, geographical of the land. So you have to consider juga where the geographical aspect of the land that you choose. Okay, so enough suitable land must be available for the proposed plant as well as future expansion. So kamu jangan ingat bila kamu pilih location, kamu jangan lupa when you choose a location, the land area also you must consider, you must state land area, and you must also consider the area for expansion. Okay, so maybe you will ask me, macam nak tahu berapa area dia, doktor? The easiest way is senang je. Okay, you see your competitor. Okay, let's say competitor kamu adalah company A, alright. Then second, you consider dia punya production rate and your production rate. So for example, simple example, katakan company A 200 acre at 100 metric ton per year annually. Okay, so let's say yours one is 200 metric ton annually. So the area will be times 2 lah. So it's just a perkadaran. The easiest way for you to know, use your competitor land, you do the comparison, but must be based on the production rate. So production rate can be a very good basis for you to do the conversion factor in your decision to determine the size of your plant, as well as the competitor location pun can be a factor that will help you to decide yours. So let's say kalau competitor kamu semua kat tempat ni, let's say your competitor 5 or 6 competitors all are located in one location, that tells you something. Why are all these competitors are placed over here? There must be many reasons why they choose this location. So that can be a factors for you as well when you consider the location. Okay, so talking about geographical of the land, okay, the land must be flat, of course lah kan, the land must be flat, well drained, on suitable load bearing capacity. So the land cannot be consist of a thin soil, because kalau thin soil, you imagine you build a plant, they cannot sustain the load. Okay, so care must be taken when building plants on reclaimed land. Okay, so if let's say you want to build your plants nearby to a reclaimed land, you may have to consider or nearby, or let's say near earthquake zones because of the poor seismic character of such land. So in our case, we don't really need to consider about the earthquake lah, right? We don't need to consider about earthquake because that's not a factor in Malaysia. So that's maybe one factor that we don't need to consider. But if let's say you're building your plant in other countries where they are prone to earthquake, sometimes hurricane, so they have to consider this factor as well. And of course, the cost of the land. So as I told you just now, memang kalau bina kat the main industrial zone memang senang because they have all the facilities. But the cost of the land will definitely be more expensive in comparison to others. Okay. So next, climate. Okay, so in the case of Malaysia, perhaps it's not too bad because we only have one weather the entire year. But let's say we are considering building in a country with 4 seasons, then this can be a very important factor. Okay, so adverse climatic condition will increase cost. So for example, let's say winter. Okay, let's say the country suffers from winter. A low temperature require provision of additional insulation and special heating for equipment and pipe runs. So imagine if let's say the country suffers from winter which can go below zero. You know that below zero, it will become solid, right? It will become ice. So you have to consider how to maintain the constant heating, not only of the equipment, constant heating of the pipe as well. And you know, when it's cold, you want to ensure that the temperature is constant. You have to add additional insulation to ensure that no heat loss to the environment, so on and so forth. So, and then remember, when it comes to spring or comes to summer, kena buka balik. So you have to consider all these additional costs just because of the change of the weather. Okay, so let's say if you are building your plant in the places where there are cyclone, hurricane, earthquake, so all this also you have to consider how to make sure your equipments are really your equipment does not move or will not suffer from any losses or any losses when these conditions occurs. Okay, so for example, okay, in a very simple example, we're talking about nuclear reactors in Japan. So just a perspective of the story that you have heard of the tsunami that causes the nuclear explosion in one of the nuclear reactors in Japan. So for your information, actually in Japan, they rely heavily on nuclear energy as their source of energy. So for example, in Malaysia, we are very lucky. We have other abundant sources. We don't need nuclear energy. But in Japan, they have very lack resources. So they have to rely on nuclear energy, which comes from nuclear reactors. So in Japan, they have many nuclear reactors all around the country. And all these nuclear reactors are placed nearby the sea. Kalau kamu tengok dalam gambar ni, all the nuclear reactors will be placed nearby the sea. Okay, so why must be nearby the sea? Because nuclear reactors needs a lot of water to cool down the reactor. So kamu kena faham bila nuclear reaction occurs to get the nuclear energy. Nuclear reaction is very exothermic. They release a lot of heat. Sebab itulah heat tu digunakan sebagai tenaga. So in order to cool down this reactor, they have to use seawater. So in order to use seawater, that's why these nuclear plants are located closely to the sea. But on the other hand, remember happened, there was a tsunami in the middle of the sea. So the tsunami occurs that causes the earthquake occurs first, and the earthquake causes the tsunami. So the tsunami that causes actually the explosion of one of the nuclear reactors. So you can see they consider one aspect, like this nuclear plant consider the utility aspect. They got a lot of waters, but they fail to consider this climate issue, which was the earthquake and then the tsunami. Okay, so the moral of the story is you got many factors to consider, but that eventually one factor might be good, another factor might not be good. But as I told you before, regardless of what, safety must come first. So in this aspect, they have actually done many precautionary steps, because I've been to one of I was very lucky. I've been to one of the nuclear reactors in Japan. The one that I went was nearby Shimane. I went to the Shimane nuclear reactors, and they give us a briefing, and they really mention all the security, all the features that they have done. So for example, in the case of these nuclear reactors, they have backup generator. Yang berlaku kat tsunami ni, the one that explode, they have backup generators, meaning if let's say the heater failed to work, they have backup generators. But on that day, when the earthquake occurs and the tsunami occurs, even the generator failed to work. So you have backup will fail to work, and then I think they have another backup. That backup also failed to work. So in many of these equipments and processes, they will always have backup. But in the case of this nuclear reactor, unfortunately, even the backup failed during the incident and caused the explosion. Okay, right. So next one, local community consideration. Okay, so when we talk about local community consideration, you must consider the local community as well. So you can't just take their area, build one chemical plant, and do not consider them. They are also equally important to you in the building of your plant, because this plant must be acceptable to the local community. Okay, this means you have to consider the safe location so that they don't pose additional risk to the local population. Meaning, whatever emission from your plant, okay, you have to consider whether it has its risk towards the local community. And then as well, if you are using local labours, or in fact, even if you're importing labours, you have to consider facilities for them. Okay, so you have to make sure that they have adequate facilities, such as school, banks, housing, recreational and cultural facilities. So you must make sure you have mosques, you have a church, or you have temples to accommodate the local community needs. Okay, and then the local community must be aware as well and must be consulted about your plant water consumption, discharge, emission, and the effect of the plant on local traffic. So for example, let's say you're bringing in many overseas, you're bringing in immigrant workers, for example. So you have to consider how this may affect the local community as well. So kamu kena ingat, the responsibility not towards the company, but it's also towards the community. Okay, so for example, but again, as I told you, normally industrial plant zones, they have already considered this. Okay, so for example, this is industrial zone of Pengerang. Okay, Pengerang is one of the upcoming industrial zone in Johor. Okay, so when you have a new industrial zone upcoming, it gives an opportunity for actually the industrial zone and the government to actually design and ensure all these are taken into account. So for example, Pengerang, it's going to be one of the big industrial zone. They've already considered all these. Okay, for example, they are nearby to the transportation, so they are nearby to the seaport. Okay, second, you see they have already all these utilities. They are already connected to the national grid for the electricity. All right, and then you can see as well as storage, import, and so on, pipeline as well. Next, you can see that pengerang have a buffer zone, okay, after certain at a certain area location, all right. The external of it will be encapsulated by a buffer zone, means nothing can be built or nothing can be done at this buffer zone, and outside the buffer zone is the residential and commercial area. So this industrial zone, pengerang developer has even provided a special residential and commercial area, and to ensure their safety, they have already even located, give a buffer zone from the industrial area to the residential area, and even they have environmentalists, they have some sort like a green area nearby as well to protect the environment. So that's the advantage of a new industrial zone. They can properly plan it to consider all of these factors, so that when you build a chemical plant over there, you don't have to worry anymore. All these are being taken care already. But of course, it means at certain cost. Okay. So next one, environmental impact effluent disposal. Okay. So next week, I will teach you more in details. This one is towards the plant location, how your environmental impact and effluent disposal influence your plant location. Okay. So you must consider, okay, when you're talking about your plant, once you establish the process, I told you, right? When you establish the process, you will establish the raw material, you establish the product, you will establish your side product, and in 2 or 3 weeks, you will also consider the utilities as well. So all these will have to be considered in your effluent disposal and environmental impact. So you know, all industrial process produce waste, but you must remember each plant will produce different types of waste. So the consideration is different and very unique to your plant. So you tak boleh kata, if I use this method, another plant also can use. Not necessarily, unless you're producing the same type of waste. Okay, so you have to consider the difficulty and cost of disposal. So if let's say you are producing hazardous products, or you are releasing hazardous gases, emission of gases, then you have to really consider how are you going to treat this. And don't forget, Malaysia government, not only Malaysia, other governments have a very tight local regulation that govern the disposal of toxic, harmful effluents, and you have to consider all the regulations when you are treating your waste. So at this stage, perhaps probably about 1 or 2 weeks, hopefully by next week or the following week, kamu dah kena tahu apa yang kamu hasilkan, dan what will be your waste. Okay, from that only you know how you going to treat the waste. So kamu tak boleh buat macam general. Okay, kalau waste ni, kalau solid saya buang. No, you have to specify. Okay, let's say you have solid waste. My solid waste is this chemical, blah 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 blah. This is how I'm going to treat them. Okay, let's say your emission is gas emission. Let's say you're producing methane or ethane, so on and so forth. You can mention clearly how are you going to treat all these gases, as well as liquid and solid. So again, let me tell you, you have to specify clearly what is your waste according to your project. It cannot be a general discussion, but very specific to the waste from your chemical plant. Okay, so this is an example of what this is pengerang. So pengerang has in their blueprint of this industrial zone, they've already mentioned what are the strategies that will be done by the industrial zone to curb all these environmental impact and disposal as well. So if you want to know more, you can actually see the blueprint. It's easily downloaded from the internet. You can see all the things that they have done to consider the aspect of environmental and waste disposal. Okay. So then I'm done for plant location. Okay, so first part dah sudah. We finish on deciding the location. Okay, so let's say now you have decided on the location. Second part, now you have to design your site layout. How are your buildings going to look like in your plant? Okay, so don't forget the buildings I will mention later, not only your chemical plant, but the other buildings related to your site. And don't forget, the arrangement has certain standards and codes. So kamu pun tak boleh sembarangan letak office kat depan, plant kat belakang, tak ada jalan kat tengah. No. When you have the site layout, you have to follow certain standards and codes as well. So for your design project, 2D is sufficient, 2D drawings are sufficient. But if you terlebih rajin or you terlebih creative, you can go to 3D. So this is a 3D graphics of a complete plan. So let's say kalau kita tengok the 3D one easier to see, right? So you see they have a side entry, so that you have to identify the main entry for your plan, means the one that will be used by all the workers, visitors, customers, supplier. You have a gatehouse, you have a car park, laboratory, you have workshop, admin buildings, you have substation for electricity, then the chemical plant as well, then you have workshop as well. Okay, so this is the general one. I will explain in details what do you need to have in your site layout. Okay, so the site layout of the process unit and ancillary buildings, not only your chemical plant, even the ancillary buildings, office, workshop, fire station, power treatment plant, water treatment plant, so on and so forth, must be arranged in a way so that you have an efficient flow of material and personnel throughout the site. So kita nak make sure the flow is good, but at the same time, certain consideration as well. So for example, hazardous process should be kept at a safe distance away from other buildings. So let's say you have hazardous process, then of course you want it to be as far as possible from the officers or from the admin, so on and so forth. And don't forget, site future expansion pun you have to take it into consideration. You have to consider, let's say later you want to expand your chemical plant, let's say. So you have to consider as well how this plays a part in your site layout. Okay, so what do you need in a site layout? Okay, so let me explain what do you need. Okay, so it needs first storage for raw material and product. So this storage can be tank farms and warehouses. So again, kamu tak boleh specify general. Kamu tak boleh kata just my plant has a storage area. You have to specify the storage area according to your raw material, according to your product. Because the storage for gas, liquid, solid is definitely not the same. So the storage area, the tank farm, either using tank farm, you're using warehouses, you have to be very specific to your product. Okay, next to your product and raw material. You have maintenance workshop. Okay, kamu kena ada maintenance workshop, means all your maintenance will be done in the workshop. Stores for maintenance and operating supply. Workshop is where the maintenance takes place, maintenance workshop. Satu lagi store untuk maintenance dengan operating supply. Yang tadi storage untuk raw material product. Satu lagi storage untuk maintenance dengan operating supply. Then laboratory. So don't forget, all your QC will be done in a laboratory. To quality check your product, they will done it in laboratory. Or let's say your company has R&D, so you have a laboratory for the R&D as well. Next, fire station and other emergency services. So fire station ni depends, not necessary you must have fire station. Then macam nak tahu kan, depends on your raw material and your product. Do they necessitates a need of fire station ke tidak? Okay, so tak semestinya kena ada fire station. It really depends on your plant as well. Next one, utilities. Where are you going to place your steam boiler, compressed air, power generation, refrigeration, transformer station? Transformer station is for your electricity lah. Where do you want to place your utilities pula? Next one, effluent disposal plant. So effluent disposal plant ada jenis yang berlainan, whether it's wastewater, solid, liquid. So masa tu nak guna, again depends on your plant. Your plant treating water definitely kena ada lah kan. But let's say your plant treating solid, liquid, so it will be different types of disposal plant if they are using different types, if you are producing different types of waste. Office. So office pun kena ada. Cafeteria, don't forget you must have canteen. You must have a medical center, not necessarily, but at least some emergency services that can be provided for treatment, first aid first, before you can send to the local hospitals. And then parking lot. So kamu ada parking lot, kalau tak ada parking lot, then your worker tak ada tempat nak park their transports. Okay, so this is a typical site plan that considers all this. So kamu tengok, remember I teach you about PFD, right? I said that the area ada area 1, area 2. So contohnya dalam gambar ni, they have area 1 and area 2. So depends on you. If you only have one area sajalah, not necessarily kena ada 2 area. Okay, so if you identify your plant as one area, and make sure this also consistent dengan kamu punya PFD. Kalau PFD tengok satu area, letak satu area, tapi dalam site plan tiba-tiba ada 2 area. So you will kena tanyalah kenapa dalam site plan 2 area tapi dalam PFD satu area saja. Equipment semua dalam satu area. So make sure it's synchronized as well your PFD to your site plan. Okay, and then you can see they even have expansion. So they already included expansion area that located the area where if let's say your plant is expanding, you have that sufficient area. So you see they put workshop, laboratory, stores as well. So this is one of the typical site plan that is being done. Okay, now then we talk about site layout consideration. So site layout consideration ni kamu kena ingat. Sebab tu saya kata kamu engineers, technologists, we are bounded by standards and code. So these are all the consideration that you have to consider. Okay, so saya tak kata kamu kena consider semua. These are the consideration, tapi you have to choose which one is related to your chemical plant. So these are the general ones, but not necessarily you have to consider all. I think you have about 15 to 20. You have to pick and choose which one is relevant to your plant. Okay, so I'm not going to tell one by one, but you can see it includes, kalau kamu tengok, it includes safety, it includes climate, it includes, mostly actually is safety. Okay, so macam susunan site ni, they consider paling banyak adalah safety lah. So that's why they put, you can see all is quietly related to the safety. Okay, so I have the slide, I already uploaded on VLE. Please check if you want to know it in more in detail. Okay, then I will talk about right now is the standards for certain facilities. Okay, so certain facilities, I told you, are the standard and codes, right? So let me explain what are the standard and codes that you need to know when you are placing the facilities. Okay, so this is given by Novacore Chemical Limited. So this company actually gave an example of a good layout example. Okay, so this is a example lah, good example. Nak sendiri kamu kena ikut. Tapi dia lah example susunan yang dia kata, dia recommend yang talking about chemical plant. Okay, so first of all, let me talk about utilities first. So utilities ni, okay, what are the factors that you consider? First, okay, kamu tahu utilities termasuk steam, electricity, water, heating, boilers, so on and so forth, right? So these utilities should be located away from hazardous area. So katakan chemical plant kamu, okay, you know that where are the areas that you have all these hazardous chemical, make sure your utilities are located far from this hazardous area. Okay, next, maintain adequate separation because utility loss could lead to unsafe condition. So utility ni kamu ada steam lah, compressed steam, kamu ada hot water, you have boiler, especially boiler. So make sure they are placed somewhat far or a sufficient separation. Sebab kalau any fire or explosion, it will cause a major catastrophe. Okay, sebab utilities ni is the one that one of the major risks in a chemical plant. Okay, next, increase reliability of the utilities by keeping adequate spacing between boilers or generators. So boiler, katakan kamu guna lebih pada satu boiler, and katakan boiler ni working at different temperature. So kalau kamu letak dia berdekatan, you know heat transfer, right? Heat will be transferred as well. So it may disturb the operating of the next boiler or the next equipment, so forth. So separation between this equipment also may need to be considered in the utilities facilities. Okay, so next one, control room. Don't forget, every chemical plant has a control room. So every control of the entire chemical plant will be placed in a control room, and you will have personnel working in a control room. Okay, so control room must be chosen to allow operators to safely shut down units under emergency condition and will not be exposed to fire or explosion. So control room ni kena berada pada tempat yang selamat ataupun tempat yang jauh daripada the location where the high risk of fire or explosion may occur. Kenapa? Sebab from control room only you can shut down the operation. So let's say katakan control room kamu dekat dengan proses plant, and let's say proses plant kamu terbakar atau meletup, you cannot reach the control room, you cannot shut down your facilities. So that's why it must be placed at somewhat far locations. Tak boleh jauh juga, terlalu jauh pun tak boleh juga. but must be safe locations so that you can do emergency shutdown. You can be done quickly in the control room. Okay, so but let's say kalau kamu tak boleh letak control room tu jauh daripada plant, let's say it's not possible, then consider building the design the building to withstand explosion. So katakan kamu tak boleh bina control room tu jauh daripada chemical plant, then make sure the control room is fully protected with the walls to withstand explosion. Okay, so that's one way. Protect your control room. Okay, kalau kamu tak boleh bina jauh, protect control room. Make sure kalau ada explosion ke apa, control room tu will not be damaged. Sebab any emergency shutdowns normally from the control room. So next one, okay, warehouse. Okay, kalau kamu ada services, for example, warehouse, administration building, fire station, keep all these services far away from process area. Okay, senang lah. Maksudnya, jangan, kalau plant tu janganlah buat office dekat dengan plant. Plant meletup, office pun meletup. So, you try to prevent dia macam, kalau dia tak related to one another, you try to make sure there's a separation so that it will not be even, you will not worsen the situation and melibatkan bangunan lain yang tak ada kaitan dengan chemical plant tu. So, it will be easier for you to contain the explosion or contain the fire. Okay, so these are among the examples. Next one, flares and loading and unloading. Okay, let's say kamu nak load dengan unload your material or raw material guna rail ke atau guna road. Okay, also ada consideration. Okay, so when you choose the area to load and unload your raw material or product, you may consider to reduce the plant traffic to ease emergency vehicle movement and limit exiting hazard by locating this location close to the entry gate. Maksudnya, tempat yang kamu nak load raw material dengan produk ni, janganlah dekat dengan traffic yang sama untuk orang keluar masuk company tu. Supaya kamu elakkan kalau apa-apa masalah berlaku, traffic tak jam. Kalau kamu pilih jalan yang sama untuk upload your product, your raw material, it's the same road that your worker use to access the plant, it may cause traffic, or if let's say anything happen, of course it will worsen the situation. And next, if your plant has flares, okay, if your plant has flares must be located to certain specific standards. So let's say kalau kamu identify dalam chemical plant kamu ada menggunakan flare, kamu tak boleh sebarangan letak suka-suka hati kamu. There is a special standard and code to where this must be located in your plant. There ada certain distance yang kamu kena identify. Okay, so if your plant has flares, make sure you read the standards. For example, flare standard dia pun berlainan. So, kamu kena really check your standards according to the needs of your plant, of the location of the flares. Okay. So next one, dah tak sempat. I only have a few more minutes. So I will continue plant layout in the next class. Tomorrow, supposedly our class is tomorrow, right? But tomorrow is a public holiday. Siapa yang tak tahu, besok public holiday. This is the Melaka Governor birthday. Ulang tahun. Okay, birthday lah. Ulang tahun lah. So we will not have a class tomorrow. So I will continue the lecture next week. Okay, saya ingatkan dah boleh habis minggu ni. Tapi sebab besok cuti and I don't think there's anything rushing. I think another 1 hour will be done. So the next lecture will be next Monday. Okay, sebab kita sepatutnya ada lecture tu lagi besok. So tak jadi minggu depan. Consultation is as usual on the specified time and date lah. Kecuali kalau saya rasa kamu semua kita punya consultation hari Rabu. So saya rasa tak effect lah consultation untuk Madam Nurul dengan saya juga. Alright, so that's all for today. I will see you next week, and for those group under me, I will see you on Wednesday. Thank you everyone. Thank you.